Welcome to Investing in Startups. I'm Joe Mager. This is a special episode. It's our first collaboration. It's an interview I did with Zal Bilimoria at the Future Titans Summit here in Austin. Future Titans is a new emerging manager summit hosted by my friend Daniel Dart, who runs Rocket Adventures, and it was awesome. Zal, who I interviewed in a fireside chat, is a tremendous investor and the founding partner of Refactor Capital. Zal is a high-conviction, hard-tech investor and solo capitalist who manages more than $200 million. He has a fascinating career, from building products at Netflix and LinkedIn to being an early employee at A16Z to later forming Refactor. We talked about why Zal was solo, what he learned from A16Z, why he invests with conviction, how he built a robust firm without any employees supporting him, and how he managed to lead a Series D round despite his being a seed expert. Please enjoy. All right. Well, Daniel, thank you. This has been awesome. It's been a lot of fun to see it come to fruition from the very start. So congrats. It's been a lot of fun. And Zal, we're excited to be doing this. Big fan of your work. For anyone who's unfamiliar with Zal, I think Daniel kind of teed him up, but he's now 4 funds deep, manages $225 million, and invests in hard tech. We're not going to get too into the hard tech piece today. I think we're going to really kind of talk about tactics and solo GP life. I thought a good place to start would be, earlier there was this guy, Bill, I don't remember his last name.
Oh, yeah, Gurley, right?
Gurley, yes. So he was here and talking about the virtues and benefits of partnerships.
Yep.
You have been very intentional in choosing the solo GP life. Can you talk about why you've made that choice and why you just embrace it with so much vigor?
Yeah. Well, first off, I think I've stumbled into this amazing opportunity to kind of run a venture fund, which I think it's just an honor and a blessing. So previously, I was at Andreessen Horowitz. I was a partner at when we were investing out of like one monolithic $1.5 billion Fund 3 and Fund 4, 2013 to 2015. There were 7 GPs at the time there, and there were 7 of us on the investment team, and there was like 40 other operating partners, so 50-ish people when I ended up joining. And then when I left in 2015, there was about 100 people. And then when I left, or I think there's 600 or so, at the firm from when I last counted. So I've seen kind of what a large partnership could look like, and kind of some of the dynamics around what the bureaucracy and the decision-making and perhaps the lack of speed in that decision-making that can occur when you're kind of chasing investment decisions, and especially at the seed stage. You got to move fast. And then, when I spun out of A16Z a decade ago, I started Refactor with another partner, David Lee from SV Angel. He and I were at Google like 20 years ago, and he was also getting into bio and health at SV Angel with Ron Conway. And he had just left SV Angel, this was like 2015, and I was thinking about spinning out as well, and he convinced me to kind of join up with him, and we were the GPs on Fund 1 that we ended up raising, $50 million fund in 2016. He ended up retiring. He's like 15-ish years older than I am, and he gave me the keys. And I was freaking out because he had told me, and Sean Park, by the way, from Citizens, one of the sponsors, was our first CFO here in the front of the room. Amazing. We would not have been able to start Refactor without this guy. Amazing. And so I'm sitting there with David, and he had told me that, okay, it's all like, I'm probably going to give you the keys, after Fund 2 or Fund 3. Fund 1, he's like telling me like, I'm peacing out. And I was like, okay. And I'm like, I'm going to go find, a replacement for you, right? I'm going to talk to my friends, like other people at, the venture funds, and see if they want to like join up with me. And he's like, you could do that. You should probably stay solo. This is 2018, by the way, 2018, right? Early 2018. So solo GPs were not in vogue at that time. And, I was a little bit worried about, okay, am I just literally going to be the only person in this office, right? Like making decisions. And he's like, no, Zal, you love your independence. You love your autonomy. Founders love you. Like, you should just keep doing what you're doing. And I put that in my back of my head, and I was like, okay, I'll think about that. I spent 6 months talking to a bunch of my friends who were investors. Let's say there's 10 steps in the GP marriage process, right? I got to maybe only step 2 or 3 with anybody. One of my friends, LP in my fund still, he's running his own venture fund now. But at the time, he's like, oh, let's go do a $500 million fund. We'll do fintech. I'm like, no, dude, I don't want to do that. Like that seems antithetical to doing proper seed investing. And so don't really want to do that. And then another person wanted to go in a different direction. So I just came back to David and I was like, talking to all these people, you were right. You were right. Like, I'm gonna do the solo. And it was a hard raise, right? Fund one, David and I, if you guys don't know David Lee, look him up. Like, this guy's a legend, absolute legend. Invested in Twitter, Snapchat, DoorDash, Stripe, like just insane track record at SV Angel. And it still took us 16 months to raise our first fund back in 2016, 50 million, right? He leaves, walks out the door. Like, do LPs love managerial changes? Not so much, not so much. So I had to literally rebuild the LP base in Fund 2. Luckily, our anchor stuck around. They saw the performance of Fund 1, which was looking really good. I ended up actually deploying 90% of Fund 1 because I was writing the larger checks, the concentrated checks. David was kind of doing more of the smaller opportunistic checks. And so it had an opportunity for me to, showcase with our LPs that I can actually pick some winners. I grinded out fundraise, raised 36 million, so a much smaller fund than the previous fund. So I went from 50 to 36. And that also took me about 16 or 17 months to raise. And again, I have been doing it solo without anybody. Not just no partners at this point for the last 8 years, no principals, no associates. I'm the only employee at the fund. I only raised $50 million funds. And so we'll talk about that in a second. But I decided that I wanted to have as much time with our founders as possible. Because if I had to hire like principals and associates, I'd be spending time with them and like they'd be trying to bug me like, oh, what does Zal want to invest in? I want to go try to figure out something to do there. And I had managed people in my operating career. And I was not a fan of actually doing that. I don't think I was that great at it, just to be honest. And so I think keeping the fund size consistent and staying completely solo as a solo employee, solo capitalist, has worked really, really wonders for me.
Can we talk about the product of Refactor? So you have a deep product background, Microsoft, LinkedIn, Google/YouTube. How did you think about productizing the business from the founder standpoint and the LP standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, all those companies were. They were great platforms. I was a product manager for 10 years, and I was always working at the upstart, right, the small new divisions inside those companies. So at Google, I was mostly at YouTube right after the acquisition by Google, and so I was one of the first monetization people building the ad stack for 3 years when YouTube was burning cash like crazy and running out of server bandwidth. Everything was on fire. We were getting sued by Sony and all the music labels. It was just a wild time to be there, 2007 to 2010. And then I was recruited to be the first head of mobile at Netflix, completely under-resourced department. This was like 6 months after the iPad launch, so I was like, had to build the phone and tablet apps from the ground up with literally a skunkworks team that I pulled from the TV team and the desktop team to come work with me. And we had to manage 30 UIs across phone, tablet, Android, like Kindle, and a whole bunch of other products to create like a really great user experience, and that ended up turning out to be a really, really successful launch. And then I launched the Sales Navigator product at LinkedIn. So these were all really small like products inside large companies. And as a PM, for some of you that may know, like when you're a product manager, you don't actually have direct reports. I had direct reports later in my career, but in my early part of my career, I didn't have direct reports. So as a PM, you are implicitly having dotted lines coming to you from engineering, marketing, sales, commercial, all the functions that you see in a startup, right? And your job is to guide them, almost like a mini CEO, to the successful launch and iteration of your particular product. And so, yeah, obviously there's a lot of things I can learn from those experiences and that have learned and applied that to kind of some of these startups. Obviously in hard tech, there's a lot more complexity. There's hardware, there's it's not just pure software, but there's a lot of things you can learn.
To go back to the conversation around partnership, and to use the example with David as like a live fire example, I think sometimes these things can be a little more fragile than how they look. How have you thought about building robustness into the business, both for reality's sake and your own sanity, but also for the comfort of LPs?
Yeah, in terms of my bandwidth, right?
Yeah.
In terms of that, right? So.
Well, also if you get hit by a bus.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. That's right. So, yeah. So a couple things there. So one is it's really helped me, like I said before, to maintain that same fund size over and over again. So, we celebrated our 10th anniversary as a firm in December last month. I'm 4 funds in. So 50 million, 36 million, and then fund 3 was 50 million. And then fund 4 was 50 million, and fund 5 will be 50 million, so forth, right? I'll just keep raising hopefully, knock on wood, every few years, and invest in 20-ish companies every fund, and have like 8 to 10% ownership, and focus on making those investments as successful as possible, going from graduation of seed, pre-seed or seed, to Series A. And I think being able to have a successful graduation rate of those businesses, I think allows you to feel like you can actually do this without hiring more people. Because if you have a low graduation rate, your portfolio stack is gonna become extremely tight, and your time is gonna be extremely tight over time if you don't actually have the ability to hand those investments over to the next board of directors that can actually help those businesses go to the next level. And so I did the math back in Fund 2 and Fund 3, and I do it every few years when I raise, like, what is my graduation rate? If I'm doing 7 or 8 new investments every year, I'm hopefully like 4 or 5 companies are graduating every year to some level. Maybe 2 or 3 are getting acquired or shutting down, right? Because that's the game of seed, right? There's just a lot of losses. And the effective replacement rate ends up being 1-to-1, more or less. Let's put a 20% buffer on those numbers. But it allows me to balance my time and my initiatives so that I can actually make sure that I can give my all to those companies that are on my current slate. But the whole getting hit by a bus, and we were talking about that backstage, this was something that Manu Kumar from K9 Ventures told me. So there are 3 OG solo GPs everyone should read about. Manu Kumar from K9 Ventures, Steve Anderson from Baseline, and Tim Connors from Pivot North. Tim is a fellow Hoosier, go Indiana. And so, they all Tim is the one that told me, don't hire anybody. And I'm like, what do you mean, don't hire anybody? Like, I did it. I hired principals and associates, and it was horrible. Like, what do you mean? It's like, well, the really, really good ones will want to be GPs in your fund. And if you already know you want to be solo GP, that's going to be a tough conversation to have. If you're on the other end and you're just hiring and firing people every 18 months, that doesn't sound very fun, right? And if you're in that middle stage where you're like, this person's kind of good, but you're not really sure what the person's going to do, hopefully they're going to be able to have opportunities elsewhere to be an investor. But when that reserve check decision comes around, when they're actually making the principal is making a decision into a company, that might become harder to make a decision on, whether you actually want to write that check. And so for lots of reasons decided, with his advice, to stay absolutely solo. But there was one thing that Manu told me about, going back to your question. I actually have a life insurance policy that's not payable to my wife or any family. It's payable to the management company. That if anything happens to me, the LPs can actually use that capital to either recruit a new GP, dispose of the assets, or having capital that doesn't have to actually become a fund expense and a drain on performance. And so they have an ability to use that to do whatever they need in terms of building out the team and, like I said, taking care of the remaining assets.
Does it trouble you at all that your death is a liquidity event for your LPs?
Or a job opportunity. That's right. I haven't thought about it that way, but I would not be in business without their support. I've been lucky. I've had a very consistent LP base. It's been 90% the same investors for the last 3 funds. And I want to do right by them. And so this allows them, in case anything does happen, to have some room to maneuver. And the LPAC can make hopefully really good decisions based on that.
We've got a bunch of friends, many of whom are here today, who are on, they're investing out of Fund 1, Fund 2. Budgets are tight when you're on Fund 1 or Fund 2, and you need to be pretty ruthless with your budgeting. I mean, with all your prioritization, I suppose, but including with budgeting. Are there things that you spend money on now that at the time earlier you're like, this is an extravagance and I can't spend money on this, but you look back on and you're like, actually, I wish I'd started paying for this sooner?
Yeah, there's probably more than a few things. We've always had an office, but it's been pretty bare bones. And so, I'm 4 funds in. I was just telling somebody, I'm thinking about actually doing some renovations because it's pretty old at this point, and I wouldn't mind being able to spruce it up a little bit. But there's also other things, like someone was talking about pitch book access earlier. It's such an expensive product, but it's so detailed. I ended up splurging for that, right? After 10 years, right? Not a cheap investment, but I got them down. I was like, I'm just a solo guy, I'm just one guy. Can you give me a good deal? So these were some of these tools and AI tools and things like that, I use. They're not necessarily breaking the bank, but it's helpful to have, obviously, as I think about all the various tools that I need to be a successful GP. I don't think I traveled very much in the first couple of years besides for fundraising. And so being able to do that and being out there, because we have portfolio companies across the US, right? That's really important to be present. I have a couple companies here in Austin. I have a board meeting tomorrow morning, so nice trip out of it. Yeah, I think those are the types of things that I've been kind of considering. But again, not hiring people, but making sure I have the right vendors and contractors and fund admin and all the other tools so that I can actually be successful in that.
You invest in some pretty bleeding edge stuff, which is pretty exciting. Do any of the companies you have today, which stands out as the most sci-fi-esque of genuine traction with where they're at technologically, but would kind of blow people's minds?
Yeah. Oh man. It's like you pick your babies. You guys have to figure out which one you want to talk about. But it's my biggest investments. I'll talk about it. And it's here in Texas. So it's a company called Solugen. They manufacture chemicals using biology. So if you guys know, the petrochemical industry is powered by petroleum, by oil, right? We make the chemicals in the seats you're sitting on, the stage, the stuff in our homes, everywhere, with petroleum as a catalyst to make millions of different chemical compounds and formulations. One of the largest industries on the planet, multi-trillion dollars. And Solugen, instead of using petroleum, has used biology, enzymes, as a catalyst to be able to manufacture a whole host of chemicals at their plant, the Bioforge in Houston. I led their seed round 9 years ago now. Yep, 9 years ago. It was my only cross-fund investment up until last year. And I've also done some SPVs into the company. So a good chunk of that AUM you mentioned earlier is actually in Solugen. And they've scaled incredibly well, multiple $100 million run rate on their core Bioforge business, selling to energy companies, CPG, agriculture, all kinds of stuff. But when I invested, there was a little reactor about this big producing some hydrogen peroxide for pool owners and spa owners so that you can have an alternative to putting chlorine in their pools. And they were in YC at the time doing $5K of MRR when I invested, right? And so that one has been fun to see the growth. And just in the last 2 years, we've been able to come up with a chemistry that the defense industry desperately needs. It's a modern version of TNT. It's a very important high-density explosive product. And I didn't think I'd be getting into weapons and defense tech in this one, but it just so happens that this team is well-suited to go after this opportunity, as a 9-year-old company, they just pivoted basically in the last 2 years and are just seeing a tremendous amount of pull from the various governments and allies of the United States for something that only some of our potential folks in Asia know how to build right now, and they can do it very inefficiently using petroleum. And we know how to do it in a much more cleaner, much more sustainable, much more efficient way. And most importantly, here in the US, which nobody else has figured out how to do except us, right? And so talk about science experiment, right? Turning into a real viable business with massive contracts and massive exit opportunities for this business. So I don't usually take board seats. I'm on the board of this company. I'm usually a board observer or major investor, pro rata rights, all that stuff when I do the seed investment. And so I like being one of the leads or co-leads like I was with Solugen. I only ended up joining the board of this company at the Series D when I ended up co-leading that round. And this
Can we
when,
talk more about
was,
that?
Tanking.
Yeah,
So
I think this is a great thing
Yeah.
that I'd love to hear more about, selfishly. I always try and ask a selfish question when I interview people. So this is my selfish question. As someone who's at seed, to go from you lead the seed to then leading the D, there probably aren't too many examples of that happening, but I love how you willed that to be. And can you talk about how that came about, the circumstances, but also what you did in advance to set yourself up to do it both on the deal side, but also from the LP side and get the capital?
So this company, Founders Fund led the A and the B, and then the C was during the bubble, and they had Bailey Gifford and Temasek and GIC and a bunch of amazing investors put $350 million into the company in late 2020, early 21. And so they've always been very capital efficient as a company, but we wanted to go out and raise more capital in 22. And so, we were starting the fundraise, things were going really well. This was early 22. And then the market started collapsing in, April, May of 22. And I just remember the all the air just like went out of the room, like in all of these conversations. And, we were trying to raise a $200 million Series D. In the background, I was raising an SPV for the company because I was like, I want my pro rata or like close to it because I'm really bullish on the business. So I went and got, a few of my LPs to put some sizable capital together, and I had it all ready to go, and I had 20 million ready to go. And, the founders come to me where I land, it's June by that time, and I land in Houston, and the founder tells me, he's like, Zal, we have so many people want to follow on. We have actually more than $200 million of interest for follow on, but no one wants to lead it because they don't want to look silly in front of their ICs in terms of mispricing this company as the public markets are pulling down valuations, including for recently IPO companies. And so it was really a challenge on how to price late stage private assets at that time because people didn't know where the multiple should be or how the underlying value of the businesses should be considered.
And no one wanted to stick their neck out.
No one wanted to stick their neck out. That's the TLDR, yep. And so I was like, this is crazy. Wouldn't it be funny, with my 20 million SPV if I lead you around? Ha, 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 ha. I'm sitting around the dinner table with the founder. Just that's a good idea. I'm like, what do you mean? Well, you've got 20 million. Why don't you write the first term sheet? You can secure your allocation with this. I'm like, it's not a bad idea. As soon as I did that, obviously, we had so much inbound coming in from the existing investor group, plus 3 new large investors. We had 2 new investors wanting to co-lead, and we had to rewrite the term sheet to include them because they wanted to be on the term sheet.
Suddenly courageous. We'll open it up for questions in a minute, but I do have one more, which is, we glossed over, you're a concentrated investor. And I feel like most concentrated investors have some kind of origin story of what sparked their desire to invest with more conviction. What was that for you?
Part of it was just my training at A16Z of ownership matters. I remember Mark Andreessen came in one day, it was 2014, probably must have been 2014. We would have the Monday meetings. We'd be all locked in a room together from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. The first 3 hours was back to back, final GP pitches with a company that we were deciding whether to invest in that company or not. We'd break for lunch, and then we'd talk for 4 or 5 hours about those companies, plus all the other companies that we've met as individuals or as groups from before. And so Mondays were just intellectually exhausting and stimulating and amazing all at the same time. And it was in one of these Monday pitch meetings where he brings in this data, and I can't remember who it was. It was at Cambridge or it was somebody, and they had just done this huge report. Again, this is 2014, the LPs in the room probably, everyone knows this now, or most people know this now, but concentration matters, ownership matters. If you want to actually return a fund, you need to be able to believe that the investment, the time of investment, can return that fund. You have to have that belief. Otherwise, what are you doing? This is when we were doing the 100K checks out of the A16Z seed program, which was just, in my opinion, asinine. There was no reason to do this. And we were conflicting ourselves out of a ton of stuff. And so we started the Mango seed program where we were trying, okay, let's get 10% ownership in some of these seed businesses. And Chris Dixon came up with the Mango seed as one of the largest seeds. And we would do that and be like, okay, let's get 10% ownership. We will co-lead and we'll make sure that there's room for another, co-lead or follows. 1 or 2% doesn't make sense. 10% allows us to have a fund return or potential. So people don't know this, but we did the Mango seed of Benchling. A16Z did the Mango seed of Benchling, but now probably doesn't get any credit for it because they passed on the A, the B, the C, and the D, right? But I don't know what A16Z owns today, but I'm sure it's a material driver of that fund. And so that helped me figure out that concentration and ownership matters. And then, of course, when I started making investments at Refactor, talking to LPs as I'm pitching, realizing I need that target ownership as close to 10% as possible. Because if I have a $50 million fund, if I'm getting 10% ownership at entry, and I'm going to get diluted by at least 50% by exit, what's 5% of a unicorn, of $1 billion unicorn? $50 million. What's my fund size? $50 million, right? And so the math is shown, right? If you want to be a top decile investor, which usually is 3x or above, depending on which data you look at, most of those those funds have a fund returner or a multiple thereof, right? And so luckily, our first couple of funds have some of those, right? Which has allowed me to kind of, continue to have a pretty loyal LP base and continue doing what I'm doing.
Love it. Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Zal? Yeah, go for it.
I'm a solo GP myself, and definitely admire the ethos and the track record. That's a great example. I'm just curious, have you ever hired like a assistant or chief of staff? You do say we a couple times. But
Yeah. I was just telling another solo GP, don't say we, say I. And I said we. Because then they're like, oh, well, how many people are on your team if you say we? No, it's just me. I have a part-time EA that does like 10 hours a week of just scheduling. I've never met her, actually. She lives somewhere in San Diego. I pulled her out of an A16Z company 10 years ago. And she does all my logistics and scheduling for my new pitch meetings. But if it's a company I'm chasing or if it's an LP, I do all the scheduling myself. If I want to like make sure I get the times and all that, So I thought about doing a chief of staff. I don't know if I have enough work for that person, right? Like I do community dinners, but they're like, 10, 12 founders. Like I book it and I send out a couple of emails, it's done. Right? I don't really need another headcount to be able to support that. I had a fractional CFO for a while, for about 2 months, hot 2 months, because my person from Maduro left and went to a fractional CFO shop, and I wanted to work with her, Lauren. She's great. I love her, but I didn't have enough work for her because my fund model is the same. I know when to call capital. Like I know what my reserve strategy is, thanks to Sean. Like he taught me a lot in those first 2 years. I don't need anybody else to do this. Now, if I was changing my fund strategy every fund, going from 50 to 75 to 150, or if I had a growth fund, or if I had this, or if I had that, or if I had a team and I had to manage salaries and benefits, I had to manage all this other stuff, sure, I would probably need some help. But because of the strategy, I decided to, yeah.
We got time for one rapid fire.
On the fund size and doing the SPVs, have you ever thought about doing a dedicated opportunity fund, or how have you thought about that between the SPVs that you put together?
So half of my LPs, the question was opportunity funds for the podcast. This is being recorded. So opportunity fund, half of my LPs hate it. Half of them love it. So what do? I don't raise an opportunity fund. I do SPVs, deal by deal carry, only for my top 1 or 2 companies. And when I bring it to them, they know I think it's golden. I don't bring them I have a pro rata I have to fill, right? I think my SPV track record is good. I think my reserve strategy, that we didn't really talk about that with 5 seconds here, but like I've gone from 50% reserves to 20% reserves in this fund because A, prices have gone up and I want my 8 to 10% ownership. But also, I think it's extremely challenging to pick companies at the Series A. If A16Z or Sequoia is doing your Series A and you think you should just plow in automatically pro rata because you are like, oh yeah, like top foot, just did my Series A, who knows what that company looks like 3 years later, right? And so I've just decided, you know what? I want to have more shots on goal and put them in at entry because all of my FMV, my fair market value, it's just delivered at pre-seed and seed.
Awesome. Well, look, I want to thank Zal for doing this. There are a lot of buses in Austin. There's ice out. Be careful while you're here for your board meeting, but please give a round of applause for this guy. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Joe Mager is the founder and managing partner of Seaplane Ventures. The content here is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not reflect the views of Seaplane Ventures. Our host, guests, and clients may hold investments discussed in this podcast. Please invest responsibly.